Asia is undergoing a profound transformation as an Asia without American dominance takes shape, with the US alliance system and rule-based international order in the region crumbling. History, fascinatingly, exists in a state of multi-equilibrium stability, a complex steady state that appears unchanging until the balance is shattered, causing stability to reverse instantaneously. As Vladimir Lenin once said, some years pass like decades without upheaval, while some moments compress decades of change into mere weeks, and we are living in such a historic period. Last week, Asia Times published an article under the pseudonym Hon Fizi, an anonymous columnist of exceptional insight whose identity remains unknown. Titled An Asia Without America, the piece notes, looking back at events since early 2025, global de-Americanization is accelerating. In his second term, President Trump needlessly humiliated Europe, coercively strong-armed Panama, threatened to annex Greenland and Canada, and launched a chaotic global trade war. This is not a grand strategy as many assume, but rather President Trump using America's remaining power to kick over the chessboard, expecting scattered pieces to magically rearrange in his favor, a display of pure madness. This sums up Trump's first 100 days of foreign policy better than any other analysis. Many attempt to rationalize Trump's actions, but they are akin to random, wild punches weighing backward, not strategy. The illusion of grand chessboard maneuvering exists only because of the halo of the US presidency. The quote above is from the American Hon Fizi, but China's ancient philosopher Hon Fizi, in his essay Nanshi Difficulties for Scholars, wrote, "Dragons ride the clouds, serpents swim through mist. When clouds and mist clear, dragons and serpents become no different from earthworms." This means that beings like dragons, which seem awe-inspiring while soaring in clouds, actually rely on the power of the clouds around them. Strip away that supportive mist, and their majesty vanishes just as an emperor, surrounded by ceremonial guards and fanfare, loses all authority when dressed as a beggar and begging on the street. Elon Musk is no different from a village charlatan. The only difference is that he operates in Silicon Valley, a hub of global capital, allowing him to become a billionaire through persuasion rather than a rural setting. When evaluating individuals, one must remove their perceived aura and focus solely on their words and actions. Without the presidential halo, Trump reveals himself as a leader without a plan, strategy, or theoretical foundation, someone driven by impulse and constrained by resources, acting capriciously based on fleeting desires. Consider the contradictions in his policies, wanting to slash fiscal deficits while cutting taxes, increasing military spending, and expanding fiscal outlays. Demanding a stronger dollar to sustain US consumption and a weaker dollar to boost exports. Urging global capital to flood US markets through stock and bond purchases while seeking to reduce trade deficits and limit other nations' access to dollars. Imposing 145% tariffs on China, the world's largest industrial and export economy, while promising lower US prices. These are not the actions of a rational leader, but of someone trapped in self-contradictory dilemmas. Yet the blame does not rest solely with Trump. The US is caught in a crisis rooted in decades of self-inflicted errors, most fundamentally an addiction to global hegemony, a departure from George Washington's farewell warning against entangling alliances. Washington asked, "Why interweave our destiny with any part of Europe? Why entangle our peace and prosperity in the ambitions, rivalries, interests, passions, and caprices of Europe?" Today, the US, having actively provoked the Russia-Ukraine war and meddled in European affairs, is paying the price for ignoring this wisdom, burdened by $36 trillion in debt and a collapsing global order where the clouds of American power are rapidly dissipating. Washington also asked, "Why should we abandon America's unique geographic advantages? Why leave our own foundation to stand on foreign soil?" Consider today's US, with over 700 military bases worldwide, spending roughly 4% of GDP on defense, more than the next 9 countries combined. As the defense industry privatized, it formed interest groups intertwined with power, breeding corruption, distorting markets, and draining national strength through endless wars. Washington warned against permanent foreign alliances, yet the US now leads NATO, the G7, the Quad, and countless military pacts, abandoning its founding principles in pursuit of global hegemony. The article cites historian Stephen Wertheim, America's early pursuit of leadership stemmed from genuine fears of fascist domination in Eurasia, not malice. But hegemony became an addictive drug. After the USSR's collapse and China's integration into the US-led economy, America saw itself as eternal ruler, yet global dominance carries steep costs. Overextension has left the US vulnerable. Russia challenges NATO in Ukraine, China and Iran assert themselves in Asia and the Middle East, and North Korea acts unpredictably. At home, drug abuse, obesity, crime, and mental health crises persist, while decades of senseless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have drained national power. As US strength wanes, alliances fray. Built on contradictory motives, free-riding and blame-shifting, they strain under the US demand for allies to share hegemony's costs. For example, Trump's NATO military hikes. Allies, however, seek benefits without responsibility. Now, Trump is dumping allies, even threatening to exploit them. The US has withdrawn from its global role, telling Europe to handle the Ukraine war and leaving Asia anxious about Trump's erratic decisions, from strategic retreat to trading Taiwan for short-term gains. One certainty remains: China's rising power makes maintaining US influence in Asia increasingly costly. As this trend continues, Trump's blame shifting will worsen, forcing free-riding nations to choose. Once, Asian states balanced China with US or Russian support, not out of loyalty, but proximity. Now, with US support fading, that option vanishes. The smartest nations are already realigning. The recent India-Pakistan air conflict may be the 21st century's most pivotal, rewriting Asia's geopolitical script. India, long the South Asian hegemon, faced a 6-0 defeat by Pakistan, despite its larger military budget and arsenal. This dimension reduction strike, enabled by China's battle-tested integrated warfare system versus America's untested model, has convinced nations like Bangladesh to adopt Chinese air defense systems, emulating Pakistan's reliance on China's strategic framework. How threatening is this to India? A glance at the map reveals that India's northeastern region is connected to its mainland via a narrow corridor, the Siliguri corridor, where Bangladesh, Nepal, China, and Bhutan meet. If this corridor were cut off, India's 7 northeastern states would lose all logistical links to the mainland, leaving them vulnerable to the region's existing separatist movements, such as the independence campaign in Manipur. If Bangladesh begins arming itself with Chinese-made weapons, India could face a two-front crisis squeezed between Pakistan and Bangladesh, while the Siliguri corridor remains perpetually at risk of closure. Cut off from land and sea access, India would struggle to maintain control over its northeastern territories, making independence for these regions a matter of time. With Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and China all at odds with India, New Delhi may have no choice but to align with the US, a move already underway. As Reuters reports, India plans to slash tariffs on all US goods to zero, a surrender that will leave it ripe for American economic exploitation. Worse, by becoming a US junior partner, India forfeits its claim to leadership among developing nations. How can a lackey of the bourgeoisie lead the proletarian world? China, meanwhile, has solidified its role as the de facto leader of the global south, diminishing India's influence in forums like BRICS. All of this, a geopolitical earthquake in South Asia, stemmed from a single air conflict that lasted mere hours, yet cost India its future. This is why China must avoid the temptation of military adventurism. Recent online rhetoric from self-proclaimed nationalists advocating force against neighboring countries reeks of hegemonism, not patriotism. India, too, was convinced of its invincibility, boasting superior numbers and meticulous planning, yet still suffered a humiliating defeat with catastrophic consequences. War never guarantees 100% victory. As the US and India have learned, hubris often leads to downfall. China's core mission must remain unchanged: build and develop the nation, improve citizens' lives. Peace and stability are prerequisites for progress, the very things the West seeks to deny by provoking conflicts along China's borders. Why walk into their trap? The West's strategy is clear: incite a Sino-Indian conflict. If India attacks Pakistan, China must defend the China-Pakistan economic corridor, a vital interest. But if India seeks de-escalation, China should avoid provocation. The fantasy of hegemony must be abandoned. As my long-time followers know, I advocate for multipolarity, neither US nor Chinese dominance. Yet the reality is stark. Brazil lacks the heft to lead South America. The Middle East is fragmented by internal strife. Europe, in decline and ideologically bound, cannot rise as a pole. Only the US and China dominate economically, militarily, and technologically, with China increasingly likely to emerge victorious. But a Chinese unipolar hegemony would be a curse, not a triumph. History shows that hegemony is a drug no power can quit. The moment China achieves unchallenged dominance will mark the beginning of its decline. Let us remember, power is most sustainable when shared.